Moving along, it's great to see so many people here on a Monday evening. Excellent. Tonight's guest lecturer is known to some of us, maybe not known to all of you, but he's a brilliant professor and speaker. I've known Mark for close on 19 years now. He is the Associate Vice President for Academic Affairs. He is the Assistant Professor of Engineering at the University of Evansville. He holds degrees from Cornell and Vanderbilt in engineering. So naturally, genealogy is the obvious thing for him to do. However, he has built up a store of remarkable knowledge on Daniel Ligne and would probably be the international expert on him now, and has published on this subject. So without further ado, it's my very great pleasure to introduce Professor Mark Valenzuela.
Thank you so much, and it's great to be able to see everyone here, and it is such a pleasure and an honor to be introduced by my good friend and colleague, Dr. Ed Bujak. And we have known each other. I keep forgetting, like, when I first came here. It was actually in 2003. Sometimes I say 2005. I say 2005, so it makes me seem younger. But I do want to thank you in Harlaxton College for offering this opportunity to be able to share with you tonight some of the research that I've done into the life and the times of Sir Daniel Ligne of Harlaxton in the county of Lincoln, Knight. And so at this point, of course, you're wondering, who the heck is Sir Daniel Ligne and why am I here tonight? And I hope to show you during our time together that the life of Sir Daniel inspired some of the stories that Gregory chose to tell throughout his use of stone and glass and wood throughout this very manor that we're sitting in today. And at the end of our time together, I hope that you will be able to see the manor in a different light, a new light, especially if after 8 weeks, some of the magic has worn off, and I'm hoping that the magic has not yet worn off, right? So this research was published in the Journal of the Huguenot Society in 2015. I think that to this day, I am still the only Filipino Catholic fellow of the Huguenot Society. I hold that rare distinction, and because the Huguenot Society, as some of you might know, is an organization devoted to the study and support of French-speaking, Calvinist, Catholic, who fled to Great Britain and Ireland from the middle of the 16th century to the early part of the 18th century, trying to escape persecution in their home countries, either in France or Belgium. And the paper represents about 7 years of research and writing that began in the fall of 2008 when I came back to Harlaxton to teach for the second time. And working with the editors, I was especially happy that they chose to contact me and said, we would love to feature Harlaxton Manor on our cover. And they chose this iconic picture, this iconic view. And it's the view that you see, hopefully in daylight, maybe in the afternoon, maybe on a clear summer day when you arrive to the manor for the very first time. And here it is, kind of in all its full glory, right? And so you see on the left-hand side, the red brick walls of the kitchen garden, and kind of in the middle ground, we have the gatehouse, and looming large above us is that beautiful Harlaxton Manor. And of course, we have to pass through the Salvin gatehouse. But in 2008, instead of seeing this, I saw this. Right? So this is a common sight that you see in your travels and around England and in Europe. And I thought I had walked into a Christo art installation from the 1980s. And some of you are smiling because you know that he wrapped up, I think, the Reichstag, right, in 1986 or so. But the purpose of this was to clean up the exterior and also to build inside the McCarthy and also the Kingsley flats. And as Ed mentioned, my background is in engineering, and I'm also curious, kind of like our cat, right? So what's behind the curtain? And fortunately, I was able to conquer my fear of heights and was able to climb the ladder, and Suzanne Kingsley was able to arrange a visit and a tour for my engineering students and myself. You might notice me looking very scared up on the scaffold in the red hat. Suzanne Kingsley is to my left, and then those are my students in the high-vis vests. But I'm glad that Ed is here because I remember that day when we were able to see the gatehouse without the wrapping later in the fall term of 2008. And I remember it because you and I had just spent a lovely Sunday afternoon at Belton House. And you and Joanne and I, plus another American faculty member, Michael Cullen, and his wife Ruth, got in your car. And so I'm imagining all 5 of us in your car, kind of like clowns in a Volkswagen. But as soon as the scaffolding was down, we stopped off. And we wanted to admire all of the work. And so as we looked up, I had a different set of questions, because as you look up, you see these 4 coats of arms or shields. And the easiest one for me, of course, to recognize is the shield that's on this podium, on this lectern, that the college has appropriated. And it's the coat of arms, of course, of the Gregory family. But rather than ask engineering questions behind the scaffolding, I wanted to ask some more human questions, like who are all of these other families that are arrayed around the Gregory coat of arms? And the question then is like, well, why is the structural engineer kind of interested in that kind of question as opposed to the question of the stone that they're using, the techniques for etching the stone? But it does come from kind of this crazy Catholic background that I have. I'm used to asking that question because in churches we're surrounded by icons and symbols that point not just to persons, but also to ideas and ideals, to something beyond the stone, the glass, and the wood. And so, for example, you could go to any church. This happens to be an Anglican church. It's the Church of St. Mary the Great in Cambridge. I was just there with Cindy and my partner Michael. And I can look at a statue like this and recognize the winged lion representing St. Mark. It's right there. And he represents the gospel writer, St. Mark, but also this whole idea of being courageous and spreading the good news, like a voice crying out in the wilderness. And it's not too far-fetched to think that Gregory also thought about icons and symbols and heraldry in ways that aren't just decorative, in ways that aren't just the fact that it's pretty, it's shiny, it's kind of fantastic, because we know that he had in his library books on heraldry, on genealogy, and chivalry. And we know that he had these books because we have the Gregory Heirlooms inventory, and that's being cataloged by our librarian, Linda Dawes, in collaboration with students who come here from the University of Evansville. In fact, here is a copy of one of those books. We don't have those books here anymore, but I was able to find a nice PDF version of this that I can share with you. And it's a book about the coats of arms of the knights of one of the oldest orders of chivalry, the Order of the Golden Fleece. And I want you to pay attention, especially to this coat of arms over here, because we'll start to see that. But we'll kind of recall that the coats of arms are special symbols that represent not only a particular noble, but also the ideals of chivalry, which were having something of a renaissance during the time of Gregory. In fact, if we take a look at the Gregory Heirlooms inventory, we notice that he owned works by the author Sir Walter Scott, who wrote popular novels that helped in the rebirth of chivalry in the Victorian period, and it helped to revive that as part of the public imagination. So we expect that Gregory was careful and intentional about the use of heraldry because he was informed about its history and about its usage. And because, at least in the United Kingdom, heraldry and the right to bear arms is still highly regulated through a system of heralds. And here I show the court of the Lord Ligne, King of Arms, who actually regulates the use of the coats of arms in Scotland. But at this point, you see 5 people dressed in tabards, is what we'll call them, fancifully dressed, but they look like they're at a fancy dress ball, right? So you might think it's kind of quaint, might be antiquated, arcane, old-fashioned, but we actually still participate in the use of symbols and icons and heraldry to denote identity and belonging. So these monks will be familiar to the students because they represent the houses of Harlaxton. So you see Gregory, Mercia, Pegasus, and Newton. You students are actually participating still in symbols that have meaning to people outside of your houses. So if you've participated in the British military, you might recognize the double-headed eagle of the Mercia units of the British Army. And if you see the Pegasus badge, if you participate in the British military, you might recognize that as symbolic of the Airborne Division. But some of you might have also gone to Newton's house in Woolsthorpe, and you'll recognize the crossbones that are used in the coat of arms of Newton. So you're participating in history and identity and belonging. So with that in mind, with the importance of heraldry and symbols, let's take a walk through the manor with a bit of a mission. To note instances of the use of heraldry and to see if we can figure out which families greet all the visitors at our gatehouse and why. So, of course, as we walk through the front doors and we come into a rather dark entranceway, we're again confronted by a couple of coats of arms, just two this time. And we'll see that the Gregory coat of arms are on the left-hand side, and I'll go ahead and say it because I haven't said his name in a while. The ones on the right-hand side are related to Sir Daniel de Ligne. And so he must have been important to be one of the two that greets you when you come to Harlaxton Manor. The other thing that you'll notice about this fantastic display is that it has all of the things that you would expect for a knight. You see lances, you see battle axes, you see a mace. You carry those things in jousts and in tournaments and in the field of battle. But let's continue on, shall we? We walk up the stairs and you're greeted by the Ridgeway Great Hall. And we make our way to the far background where the dais is, and then we take a left. And we're greeted by this wonderful stained glass window dated 1837 by Thomas Willimant. And in fact, Thomas Willimant was the heraldic artist to Queen Victoria. And you'll see his work all throughout England. And this happens to be our Rosetta Stone. It's the way that we're able to translate some of the symbols and some of the heraldry and some of the icons that we see scattered throughout this house. And here we see, told in colored glass and heraldry, Gregory's family tree. And you'll notice that it's basically a triptych divided into three different parts. We'll actually take a look at that central part. But it's interesting to note because this is the family tree that Gregory chose to share with us. So he didn't include everybody who was his ancestor, but he chose particular ones, probably for particular reasons. And he chose a family tree that he thought was true. And we'll see if that's the case. And so here's a close-up, and you'll notice that on the left-hand side, we'll call that the full achievement of arms, right? So you see the knight's helmet, but on top of the knight's helmet, you see the crest of the three wheat sheaves or the three garb, and then at the very bottom, you see the motto of the family of Gregory, Crux Scutum, the cross as my shield. And you'll notice that the shield is actually divided into 10 different parts representing 10 different families that he wanted to highlight. And here's the Rosetta Stone, that bottom bit, that shows two different sides of that family. One side is actually the British family, and I'll let you kind of guess which one based on the names. And then the other side is the family that's based out of the European continent, more specifically the Low Countries, what we would call today the Netherlands or Belgium, and also parts of northern France. So the British side is represented by Gregory, Alton, Kyme, Williams, Upton, and then Denton. And then the continental side is represented by de Ligne. And then the next one, oh, I have to remember myself. Barbenson, also, Arenberg, and then Delamarque. And so it's an impressive family that he's actually showing off. The de Lignes were princes of the Holy Roman Empire, and I'm told that the Holy Roman Empire is neither holy nor Roman nor an empire. Connected in some way or another to many of the royal houses and the royal families of Europe, including the House of Stuart as well as the kings of France. They were honored by being invested in one of the oldest orders of chivalry, the Order of the Golden Fleece, that's still in existence today, superseded just by the Order of the Garter, I believe. And we can take a look at the importance of these families, especially in the public imagination, by taking a look at this quote by John Claudius Loudon, who wrote about the design of gardens in the 19th century, he had a popular journal, and visited Gregory at Harlaxton in around about 1840, and wrote what he knew of the family from the continent. And I'll just quote, "The family portraits and the arms of the family in stained glass, with a pedigree written in the French language of the day, are still preserved in the old house, the old manor house, which is no longer there, but we're going to be fortunate to have a little visit to the remains of that on Wednesday. It is an interesting family record showing how many of this house have been Knights of the Golden Fleece and borne many important charges of government, both civil and military, during so long a period in the annals of the Low Countries and the Empire, meaning the Holy Roman Empire. And in fact, here is a portrait of Jean de Ligne and his wife Marguerite, and these two are actually featured in the stained glass windows. Marguerite is a bit unique and stands out because she's a woman who had the right to bear arms and was in fact the heiress to the Ehrenberg house. And so if I'm taking a look at Jean, I'm going to say to Jean, you married up. He actually improved his position in life. And the union of Ligne and Ehrenberg is commemorated in this Willamette window. And as you look closely at the coats of arms of Jean de Ligne, we see that chain or that necklace that's worn by those Knights of the Order of the Golden Fleece. And you'll see that here, and then here's that golden fleece, reminiscent of the fable about Jason and the Argonauts. And we actually see here a crown that represents his status as a knight. And then we see actually this red band on a gold field, Barbanson, Ehrenberg with the 3 flowers, and then Delamark with the checkers. The de Lignes led armies and advised rulers and were trusted ambassadors. And here's a portrait, the Somerset House Conference, and Charles de Ligne is actually representing the Spanish Netherlands in 1604 for the treaty that ended the war between Spain and England over the Netherlands. Now, John Claudius goes on and gushes a bit about another de Ligne because this particular one wrote an influential book on the design of gardens, so really simpatico in terms of that. And so, let me quote again, our readers will remember that it was the celebrated Prince de Ligne, chief of this family, who was so conspicuous in the leading royal courts of Europe at the close of the last century, from his sparkling wit and talents, and that he, owing to his extensive travels, was the first who was enabled to publish a general view of the style, feeling, and taste of gardens throughout Europe, and who created those of his own family seat at Belle-Ile and Hainaut. Now, let me show you a very dashing portrait of Charles Joseph, the celebrated Prince de Ligne, and you can see when he lived, and you kind of notice, he died in 1814, so he actually hung out with Marie Antoinette. Not a good person to necessarily hang out with, but that's life as a royal, as a noble. But there's just one problem. It's a bit of a fib, okay? These days, I would say it's fake news, okay? Gregory is repeating a family story that was handed down over the course of some 200 years, ever since Gregory's ancestor, one Sir Daniel de Ligne, reached the British shores somewhere around 1612. Bless you. And we finally see Sir Daniel de Ligne, or at least we think this is Sir Daniel de Ligne. He's dressed up as a knight, and he has like armor here, he has this knight's helmet, he has this marshal's baton, but we'll see if he actually ever fought in battle. I don't know. What do you think? Okay, so Sir Daniel de Ligne bought Harlaxton Manor, all the land in the ancient manor house that had been there since I think the 1200s, and he bought it in 1619. I've seen figures like 16,000 pounds or 8,000 pounds. Back in 2007, I calculated this out. It's like, what does that mean for us today? And it's something like 14 million pounds in 2007. And he still had money left over to be able to augment the house. So he was pretty well off, I would say. But I think the most important thing, I learned this, actually I thought about this at Dr. Boyle's lecture, is it's not just about the money. Property means something, especially back then and then into the 19th century and probably even still today, right? Now, Daniel de Ligne's great-granddaughter, Anne Orton, was his last heir and married Gregory's grandfather. And through that marriage, the Gregorys from Nottingham came to own Harlaxton Manor in the county of Lincoln. And it's interesting because the Gregorys bought into the story that had long been told about Daniel de Ligne. So I went to the Lincolnshire Archives up in Lincoln, and I found the following document written by Daniel de Ligne's uncle, from whom he inherited Harlaxton. This is George de Ligne Gregory, and I had to transcribe it for us because trying to read that kind of ancient writing is a little bit difficult. A native, and he's talking about Sir Daniel de Ligne. He says, a native of the province of Hainaut in Flanders, who being of the Reformed religion was driven from that country by the Duke of Alva's persecution. He was the son of Anthony de Ligne of Hainaut by Madeleine de Cordis, his wife, descended from Monsieur Jean de Ligne, Baron de Barbançon, Seigneur de Zavenberg, and Knight of the Golden Fleece of an ancient family in Flanders. Sorry for my French. So the question is, who is this Sir Daniel de Ligne, and was he who he said there was? Now, there are two things that people said of Daniel de Ligne from the time he set foot on British soil and even down through the 19th century. The first one is he fled the Low Countries, specifically Hainaut, due to the religious persecutions by the Duke of Alva. And so we have to ask ourselves, did he flee his homeland because of religious persecution? The second one is kind of a more audacious claim. He boasted of some relationship with the princely de Ligne family. And so we have to ask ourselves, was he related to the noble family of Ligne-Arenberg? But there are two things that are helping me out, or had helped me out, in terms of trying to do this research. And the first comes from my own experiences as an immigrant into the United States. Back in 1974, we traveled as a family. We met up with family who was there. So if you wanted to know about me, you didn't necessarily need to find information about Mark Valenzuela. You just needed to find Valenzuelas who happened to hang out with Reyes's somewhere in the United States. And so families matter. In fact, it's been noted that these family groups, these refugees, of course, started to basically do what we call chain migration in the United States, right? So families matter. The second thing that mattered is that money matters, because those folks who had that kind of status, that kind of position, and that kind of money can actually show up in historical records. It's the way it is. It might not be the thing that needs to happen, but it's the way it is. So class dynamics will actually help us out in terms of exploring these claims. Now, both the claim that Daniel de Ligne fled persecution on account of his Reformed beliefs and the claim that he was descended from Catholic nobles are rather remarkable and quite possibly highlighted so that he could better fit in as an immigrant in his adopted country, England. Protestant England was sympathetic to the plight of Protestants on the continent, at least most of the time, when it suited them, I think. Protestant England was also very sympathetic to anyone who's fighting Spain, perhaps especially because they rebelled against the Catholic aristocracy in the Low Countries who were propped up by the Spanish kingdom. So the Low Countries were part of the Kingdom of Spain. And so here we see a map, and then circled is the county of Hainaut, where we expect to find information about Daniel de Ligne and his family. Now, again, thinking about the context of that time, in this late 1500s and early 1600s, just massive social upheaval that I can't still today fathom in terms of social strife, religious strife, political strife, economic strife. And so the monarchs of Spain sent the Duke of Alva to restore some order, or the order that they wanted, in the Spanish Netherlands. And the Duke of Alva apparently was hated as a tyrant. He used the so-called Council of Blood to drive out thousands of Protestants from the Low Countries. So here he is in this kind of allegorical drawing, showing the counties and the provinces of the Low Countries represented by these women in chains. And if we take a look at a close-up view of the Duke of Alva, we'll notice that he's not portrayed in a very flattering light, right? Himself, not so bad. He's dressed as a knight, but you'll notice that we have this devil kind of figure with breasts, and we've got like the crown of the Holy Roman Empire, and then we have the papal tiara here, trying to draw some associations there. And then we have this odd thing where this clergyman is blowing some noxious fumes into his ears and filling his mind and his heart with evil. At least that's what this particular portrait would want you to think. Now, some estimate that 30,000 Protestants fled and came to England during the reign of Elizabeth I. And when the Duke of Alva wasn't driving them away or trying them in absentia, he was actually executing them. And some of you might be classical music fans and know of Beethoven's great work, Egmont. And it's based on the life of the Count of Egmont from the Low Countries, who was convicted of heresy and executed under orders of the Duke of Alba. Okay, so this is where we are. He was persecuted by the Duke of Alba. Or was he? There's one problem. There's no way that Daniel de Ligne could have been alive during the time of the Duke of Alba. Okay. How do we know this? Well, if you go to Harlaxton Village Church, you'll find the tombstone for Sir Daniel de Ligne and also his wife Elizabeth. And you'll notice that he died in 1656. In fact, Kevin Lowry was actually kind enough to help lead a tour after the first service welcoming our Harlaxton students. The thing is, the Duke of Alba concluded his reign of terror in 1573, and if I've done my math right, and I checked my calculator, I seem to have a degree in engineering, he lived to at least 80, right? Sir Daniel de Ligne. And then I had to look up mortality tables from like the 16th century and the 17th century. Very few people actually lived to be 80 at that point, right? And so there's a little bit of a doubt in my mind. And if there's doubt about that, is there then doubt about the fact that he's related to these Catholic nobles? So as Sherlock Holmes would say, the game was afoot. Okay, so I had to go through some pedigrees, and I found that the family was from Valenciennes in Hainaut, the right place for the Duke of Alva. His father was Anthony, and his grandfather was Jean. Now, was it the same Jean de Ligne who was married to Marguerite Delamarque? Just wait, we'll get to that, okay? But it also does tell me about all of the other families that he could have traveled with, right? So not just the de Lignes, but also the de Fays over here. We have the de Corbes and also de la Fontaines. And that will help us out as we try to decipher this kind of family history. Now, this actually is confirmed by William Camden, one of the three heralds who's said whether he had the right to bear arms or not. And as a herald, the shield actually identifies you as the rightful heir because of blood descent or because of bequest. And so the herald's job is actually to do that kind of research. And Camden, writing in 1619, says something like this: "And being required by Daniel de Ligne of Harlaxton in the county of Lincoln, Esquire, to make search in the registers of my office for the ancient arms of the family of de Ligne in Hainaut, from which he said the from which he, the said Daniel de Ligne himself, had derived from, that is to say, son of Anthony de Ligne, son of John de Ligne of Valenzuela in the province of Hainaut." So that seems to be confirmed by a couple of folks, and that's really good as a researcher for us to be able to take a look at. And so I'm looking in Valenciennes and trying to figure out, like, are there any records about this family? And there are records. Unfortunately, the Council of Blood kept meticulous records about the kind of terror that they envisioned on people. And of the people they condemned, they either executed or they exiled. I apologize if this is a little small, but we'll notice that I've just excerpted out of the 12,000 names, the names that are kind of related to the families that we're interested in: the Courts, de la Fontaine, de Lignes, and also de Fay. And then here we see Jean de Fay actually was executed. The others might have been tried in absentia. And then we see here a variant of that name, Jean. So Jean de Ligne in Valenciennes, who was persecuted, Sicalvians. And so this is probably maybe the person that we're looking for. Okay. Now, the question is, where did they go? And so it turns out that I knew at some point they ended up on the shores of England. And it did turn out that they show up apparently all the way in London. And so I found records of Anthony de Ligne in London right around 1568 because a census was taken, especially of the folks that they considered strangers, these foreigners, these Protestant refugees from the Low Countries. In fact, you'll notice that it says folks who were from the French Church, born in the country of the King Philip, who had been the king of Spain at the time. And you'll notice that here is Anthony de Ligne. So is it about the right time period? I think so. It's during the Reign of Terror. Is it the right place? I think it's the same guy. But we have to take a moment to be able to think about sort of what this family of Anthony de Ligne would have encountered. They were welcomed, certainly, to seek refuge in England, but they were still considered strangers who had restrictions on how and where they worshipped and whether or not they could own and pass on land. There's that property question again. And so I knew I was kind of in the right place, and I wanted to find out more about the background, and so I knew that in the Lincolnshire archives there was this document that I wanted to get my hands on. It was the Draft Act of Naturalization, a way for Daniel Ligne to move from stranger to citizen. And so I went up to the Lincolnshire archives. I didn't know what to expect. Showed them my passport, they gave me a reader's card, and I said, I wanted to take a look at this, and they said, here. And I'm looking at it, this is the oldest thing I've ever held in my hands. Are you sure I just can use my bare hands on this sort of thing? But here it was, and I could, after a while, try to translate it. We've been talking about like trying to figure out the script. But here is my transcription of it based on another transcription that I've seen. An act for the naturalization of Sir Daniel Gallina of Harlaxton in the county of Lincoln, Knight. In all humbleness beseeches your most excellent majesty, your highness's true, loyal, and obedient servant, Sir Daniel Gallina, that whereas your said subject was born at Frankfurt, parts beyond the seas of Dutch parents, and for the profession of the true religion established in this your majesty's kingdom of England, wherein he hath been brought up from his infancy, hath been driven to forsake his own country. Frankfurt? What? These people got around. So I knew that they were in Valenciennes. I could find out that they were in London, but now we have to go to Frankfurt. So off we go. Right? I have no idea why they went, but they went. And in fact, when I start to take a look at records in Frankfurt from that time period, there was a record for Anthony Ligne, a rich merchant. Check, right? Rich, same class. A Calvinist refugee. Okay, check. Protestant refugee, not Catholic, that's all right. From Valenciennes, check. So I think this is that right person. But he turned out to be an influential person in his Calvinist Huguenot community and even helped found a small community for his fellow Calvinists, helping to make sure that they could worship as they wanted in an area of Germany that was largely Lutheran. So even amongst other Protestants, they faced different kinds of restrictions. These records are from like 1579 to 1594. So although wealthy as a merchant, he still had to face different kinds of restrictions. And so we expect that Anthony Ligne might have had some good reason to move from Frankfurt at this time. But there is a little bit of a gap. Sir Daniel Ligne pops up again in the records, but not until, as far as I could find them, in 1613. He received letters of denization that allowed him to pass on property to his children. And he had ties to the Huguenot community in London. If you've ever been or have heard of Threadneedle Church, he was actually godfather to one of the children of the chief minister there at Threadneedle Church. And it turned out he was knighted by King James in 1620 and also Sheriff of Lincoln in 1631. So he shows up in a lot of these records. So what we'll say is that it's not an entire fib. He himself wasn't hounded out of his hometown, but his grandfather was. And his father traveled between the great merchant cities of Valenciennes to London, to Frankfurt, and now Sir Daniel Ligne somehow makes his way from Frankfurt to London, we think, and then onwards to Harlaxton. And as his immigration papers say, he came to England on account of true religion as established therein, which makes the claim that he was descended and related to the noble princely Ligne family even more curious. So the first question, I think we can put a check mark there. It's truthy, as we say in the US, right? Truthy. Okay. But now we have to examine the second claim. But when I think about this claim, if I were in his shoes as a Calvinist, as a Protestant, making my connection with this Catholic royal family or noble family, I have to ask myself, it's like, why? But it's interesting because even though money can buy you like titles and knighthoods, it's still maybe that connection to nobility that will actually help Sir Daniel Ligne advance his state in England. In fact, here I show you a print from one of the battles where his supposed ancestor, Jean Ligne, who was a knight of the Order of the Golden Fleece, died in 1568, fighting alongside the Duke of Alva in one of his pushes to quell the rebellion in the Low Countries. Now, here's the question. Was Daniel Ligne actually of noble birth? Was he related to the knight who actually fought in this battle? Somehow, Daniel Ligne convinced William Camden, that herald in the College of Arms, that this was in fact true. And so I'll quote again, and I've highlighted this part of the quote. I have made search accordingly, and do find by diverse ancient books of good credit remaining in the office of arms, that the said ancient arms of the Ligne is or a chief checky argent and azure over all ben gules. And if that sounds like gibberish to you, it is, because it's the language of heralds. But let's translate that description, or a chief checky, argent and azure over all a ben gules, with this picture. On the left-hand side is the coat of arms that William Camden's confirmed for Sir Daniel Ligne, or gold or yellow. A chief checky, a chief on top, checky like a checkerboard. Argent and azure. Argent, silver, white. Azure, blue. So checkerboard of white and blue. Overall, that one I understand. A bend or a band, typically diagonal, gules, red. Okay, that's all I can say, red. Okay. Now, do you notice something that's different about this coat of arms versus this coat of arms? Yeah, I think so, right? The checkerboard pattern, or the checky. And so William Camden, I think, was hedging his bets. He's looking at the strangers, thinking, he thinks he's related to this noble family of Ligne. I'm not so sure, so I'm not going to give him this coat of arms, which is what he wanted, but I'm going to give him this coat of arms. Different enough, so I'm not lying, right? Okay. So it looks very similar, with a big difference. Now, what's interesting is I'm trying to figure out, it's like, okay, that doesn't help me at all, so I start taking a look at different pedigrees. And so it's easy, especially for royal families, noble families, to be able to get this pedigree. And so here is one that was published for Jean de Ligne and his wife Marguerite. They had several children. The first one was Charles, who became Prince of Aremberg. The second son was Robert, who was Count of Aremberg and Baron of Barbanson. But it turns out that Gregory and his family said, no, we're not descended from Robert, we're descended from Emmanuel. Look, here's our family tree. He was married to Marie, and they had this Jean de Ligne, and who married Elizabeth, who was the daughter of Jean de Fay. So where are we now? I have no idea. Okay. But what I was able to do is then take a look at more records from Valenciennes. And it turned out that there was this gentleman by the name of Casimir de Sars de Solomon, who compiled this amazing record of all of the coats of arms of different families in Valenciennes. They were noble families, but they were also like merchant class families. And so here he has drawn out in his own hand the coats of arms and all of the charges that are related to that noble family of Ligne here. And so we notice this, and then this band of gules, here's Barbanson, here's Aremberg, here's a crest. I'd love to show you that crest actually in the long gallery. But after going through hundreds of pages of this, it's all online, I find this. Ligne. Does it look anything like the coats of arms from the top? No. It's ascribed to Anthony de Ligne. And so here we see basically a white coat of arms, a black band, horizontal band like this, and 3 red cockle shells or 3 red seashells. They belonged, according to Casimir de Sars de Solomon, to Anthony de Ligne. And if William Camden had done his homework and was able to go on the internet and find this online, he would have been able to figure out that, no, this is the coat of arms that should rightly belong to Sir Daniel de Ligne. Okay. Now, what I find fascinating is that the story wasn't uncovered, as far as I know, until now. Okay. But people were really content just to pass on the same story over and over again. So in the US, we would say that's the game of telephone, right? I think in the UK, they say something like Chinese whispers, okay? So it's that kind of game, right? But Gregory wants you desperately to believe in the connection that he has to that great noble family of Ligne. In fact, if we go back to the gatehouse, we'll notice over the porter's door over here, this great heraldic piece of art. And we'll notice the Gregory family right here. And this is actually a pretty common way of being able to show like your ancestors coming together to produce you, right? But let's think about the message that this sends. Oh, I'm a Gallina. Oh, I'm a narrator. There's a message, I think, that's there, right? And then if we take a look back to the front of the manor, we'll go up. We'll try and take a look at these. So if you're in the 500 corridor, you've got some great views. But these are heraldic beasts. These are lions, right? So we want to use lions, we want to use gazelles, we want to use unicorns to support our coats of arms. But here's the Gregory coat of arms. They're holding that up. But look who's left behind. Delamark. Not important. I'm holding up Gregory now. Ligne. Not important. I'm holding up Gregory now. That's the one. In fact, it brings to mind a quote from actually the very first lecture that you would have heard from Dr. Ed Bujak, Life in the Grand Manor. He quotes John Bernard Burke, who was a noted genealogist and also heraldist. And he's talking about the importance of Harlaxton Manor. And he says something like this about Harlaxton Manor. A plain English country gentleman of moderate fortune can erect a pile which might be envied by the greatest princess of the continent. And so my feeling is that John Bernard Burke didn't hear this just out of the blue. I don't think he actually got this from anybody except from Gregory, and also the stone and the wood and the glass that he wanted to be able to use around Harlaxton. Now, how do I land this airplane? I hope that at the end of this hour, you can see the manor and even Gregory in a new light, or at least a different light. But when I think about the manor, I actually think about the people who call the manor home. I look out and I see the students and the faculty, the families that we've gotten to know. That's all of you and that's all of us. And even though there are many mysteries still about Daniel Ligne, I think that more so than Gregory, Daniel Ligne's story is actually our story. Like so many of us in this room, he was an immigrant who crossed boundaries, supported by a network of others who have crossed those same borders. I was just listening to Sam over there talking about borders and crossing from the UK into England from the UK to the United States as a Ridgeway scholar. I'm thinking about that as well. And so perhaps it's good at this point in our journey together to reflect on questions that parallel what I imagine to be the experience of Daniel Ligne. So here's some questions. In your journey as an immigrant, in what ways have you felt foreign or felt as if you were treated as a stranger? I can point to lots of different ways, especially if I go and try to pay for something in Paris and I can't speak the language. As you cross boundaries, what bridges have you built with new people to create a sense of belonging or acceptance? For me, as a Catholic, this was a compelling story, but what deeply held beliefs have been challenged on your journey this semester, whether religious or otherwise? And lastly, in what ways have you felt free to be able to reinvent yourself and make your own lasting mark? Of course, only you can answer these questions. What I hope is that you will have many years ahead of crossing borders and exploring your identity to keep revisiting these questions and your answers to these questions. And who knows, maybe your own journey will be the subject of a Gold Room lecture someday. So thank you very much. And I do want to thank all of these folks who have made this research possible and this evening possible. Thank you. Yeah, well, here I am.
Yeah, there you are. A fascinating bit of detective work in both heraldic and genealogical terms. I'm sure there's a room full of questions and Mark.
Oh my gosh, Ian, yes.
Do you get a sense that Gregory had any doubts himself about it? The reason I ask is that he has been so overt in displays, and this is where I come from.
Yeah, I was getting, sorry. So the question, if you didn't hear it, is that was Gregory not confident about his pedigree? And then the last thing I would say about Gregory is that he was unconfident. Okay, if we take a look around this. But I will say something like this in terms of doing some review and some revision of the lecture tonight. I happened upon an article that was written by somebody who called Gregory out. And this would have been around 1837, 1838. And apparently he had that journal actually also in his library. So I finally connected those two things. So he knew about this guy. Whether there was a hit on him afterwards is a different story, right? But I think he knew of the iffiness, the truthiness of that. But he continued on, he plowed on. And I think that is one of the interesting things about sort of what we see here. It's a confident display. It might not make all the best sense, but it's always filled with confidence, right? And so, for example, in this particular case, I had, I'm a structural engineer posing as kind of this crazy historian, right? But I'm trying to do it as confidently as I can.
Why are you pointing at me?
You're a proper historian.
Which point?
Oh, yeah, David.
Can I sort of follow up on?
Sure.
Because it strikes me that it's almost that house is very much a statement about his place in the local community, the way he sort of lines up the drawing box, church, and maybe association, rather than the way that he customers to essentially come down. He's really trying to show, or give the impression that this house has sort of been longer than it has. And so those sorts of associations also in locating key persons really lots of options.
Right, yes. Yes, I think that is that use, and I think it's part of that antiquarian movement that goes back to even not just the architecture that used at the time, but also the literature, which I also find fascinating. And so I think his imagination is kind of inflamed by all of that, if it were. Yeah.
Have you come across anything from Gregory's time where people nearby or people that knew about what he was building criticized him?
Ooh.
Talk about his position that it was really legitimate, non-aristocratic.
Yeah.
We see all these sort of praises of this kind of creative. What about you?
Well, I think it's captured in a comment, and I forget who made the comment, but it's really about Sir Daniel Gallina boasting. And that was the actual word, right? So he boasted of some sort of collateral relationship with the noble house of Ligne. And so I think that might be as pointed a criticism as you might get from the British from that time period, right? He's just boasting. It's just some sort of collateral relationship or some sort of relationship. But never anything overt, as far as I've seen the descriptions. That's a good question.
Any other questions? Anything? Well,
That's fine.
I think we can safely say you've earned your glass of wine this evening. Please join me in a round of applause for a very fine evening's lecture. And there is food and refreshments and wine outside for afterwards. And if you'd like to informally ask a few questions rather than asking a single question in a room like this, feel free to pester Mark relentlessly. Thank you very much.